Hey YouTube, this is Alexander, and Google has released not one, but two new Nexus devices this year for the first time ever. The LG made follow-up to the Nexus 5, the Nexus 5X, and Huawei's major entry into the US market, the Nexus 6P. Now I've already reviewed each of these devices separately, so if you'd like to see either video, make sure you hit the link down in the description, but if you're still not sure which one to pick up, I hope this video helps you out. Without further ado, this is my Nexus 5X versus Nexus 6P. Let's get started. So the 5X is the more affordable of the two, starting at just $379 for the 16GB version and $429 for the 32GB version. Meanwhile, the Nexus 6P starts at $499 for 32GB and goes all the way up to $649 for 128GB. It's important to keep these figures in mind when comparing these two devices. Perhaps one of the biggest differences between the two is the build materials. The 5X is made out of an injection molded polycarbonate, which makes the phone feel a little less premium but also much lighter. Additionally, it has a soft touch feel to it, and because of its smaller size, it's easier to hold and use with one hand. Conversely, the 6P is crafted from a much more premium feeling aluminum and features beautiful chamfered edges. Because of the metal used and larger body, the 6P is much heavier and not so easy to hold and use with one hand. This is where the 5X has an advantage for people who prefer smaller phones. Now, while we're talking about build, let's talk about these humps. These humps are where the cameras live on each. It may be easy to assume that the more expensive 6P has a better camera, but nope. The cameras are the exact same on each, which may be nice to hear if you're a potential Nexus 5X buyer. Both Nexuses are sporting Sony's IMX377 sensor, which Google says was intended for point-and-shoot cameras. As mentioned in my review, this means that you'll get very good pictures out of each device. Colors will look very nice, and although whites may be blown out in some cases, enabling HDR+ will correct that. Although the cameras are identical, the features are slightly different in each device. The 6P has a few extra goodies that the 5X misses out on, such as electronic image stabilization, burst image capture, and 240 frames per second video recording as opposed to the max 120 frames per second on the 5X. This means that while images will look pretty much the same in most cases, video may be different, but I wouldn't worry too much about that, to be honest. But then again, I don't take much video on my devices too often. Flipping around to the front, we can check out the displays of each. The 5X features a 5.2-inch 1920 by 1080p LCD display, and while it does look fine on its own, when compared to the 6P's bigger 5.7-inch highly saturated 2560 by 1440 AMOLED display, it tends to look sort of dead or washed out. Also, the 6P's display looks to be a bit colder than the 5X's when held side by side, and the 5X's is a bit easier to see in direct sunlight, but not by much. Now, I wouldn't take the display temperatures into account when deciding which one to purchase, since it's a negligible difference unless you're comparing, but if you enjoy bigger, more saturated panels, you'll definitely want to go for the 6P. Moving just above and below the display, we have the speakers. The design here on the 5X gives it the appearance of having a dual speaker setup, but that's a bit misleading because the top is actually only an earpiece for calls. The 6P does feature a dual speaker setup though, and coupled with the bigger, more saturated display, it wins this area hands down. But then again, the 5X isn't as expensive, so that should be taken into account as mentioned. Although the 5X's single speaker grille is much more tinny and distorted at higher volumes compared to the 6P, as I said in the review, it'll definitely get the job done. It's not a bad speaker to me, it's just not as high-end as a 6Ps, that's all. Perhaps another major difference between these two are the processors and RAM. So the Nexus 5X comes rocking a hexa-core Snapdragon 808 clocked at 1.8 GHz, an Adreno 418 GPU, and 2GB of DDR3 RAM. On the other hand, we have the 6P, which features a beefier octa-core Snapdragon 810 clocking in at 2 GHz, an Adreno 430 GPU, and 3 GB of DDR4 RAM. Now on paper, these differences are very apparent, but in practice, not so much. Don't get me wrong, because the 5X doesn't pack as much power nor RAM, it may have more occasional hiccups or trouble running very intensive games at high settings, but I honestly never encountered many performance issues because of the specs. I did notice that it had a tendency to reload web pages and apps more often, maybe due to the smaller amount of RAM, but comparatively speaking, the Nexus 5X does a very good job of holding its own. Moreover, the Nexus 6P hasn't suffered from performance anxiety and daily operations remain smooth. Lastly, we have battery life. The Nexus 6P features a pretty big 3450 mAh battery, while the 5X's comes in at 2700 mAh. So what does that mean for each? Well, for me, it means all-day battery life on the 6P with about 3.5 to 4 hours of screen on time. As for the 5X, well, 3.5 hours of screen on time was pretty much the max for me. I was able to make it through a 12-hour use cycle on it, but I'm able to do more on the 6P in that same cycle and still have juice left over. However, since Quick Charge is built into both of these devices, I honestly wouldn't worry too much about either one. I'm able to go from about 20 or 30% to 70 in just a few minutes. This means that while it's nice that the 6P's battery lasts longer for me, it really doesn't make a huge difference since charging it is quick enough to remedy that potential issue. So what's the verdict? Well, despite the 5X being the lesser spec of the two and having a less premium feel, I'd say that the 5X is a great device even compared with its bigger brother. Sure, the Nexus 6P feels more premium, may outperform the 5X in some situations, has a longer lasting battery, better display and speakers, and be the more all-around adored flagship from Google this year. I don't think the 5X is too far behind it. In other words, if you prefer a smaller device or can't spend the extra cash on the 6P, I think you'll be very happy with the Nexus 5X, especially since the camera image quality wasn't neglected to get the price down on the 5X, which is a huge plus. Furthermore, these are both running Android 6.0 Marshmallow and are pretty much guaranteed to receive quick updates from Google for the foreseeable future. Anyway, that's gonna end it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe down there for more videos from me. And if there was anything I missed or you'd like to hear more about, be sure to check out each device's full video review linked down below in the description, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.